Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome to a brand new tutorial series here on the channel where we're going to take a look at making a 3D action platformer game. So if you haven't messed around with 3D stuff in Unity, or if you haven't touched Unity at all before, we're going to go through some of the basics of setting up a simple little scene here in this first episode. So when you open your new Unity project, as I've started from here, you might have a different layout of windows and everything, so we're just going to make sure we're all on the same page and go up here to window and then layouts and then 2x3, just so we all have the same kind of similar setup, so it's easier to see what's going on. So we've got two views. We've got this scene view, which shows us everything that we're working on in the game, and then our game view shows us whatever our players will see when the game actually runs. So the first thing I'm going to do is just drop in a couple of things into our world. So I'm going to go up to game objects here and then 3D objects, and I'm going to create a plane, which is going to be our ground that we're going to use to walk around on for the time being. I'm going to rename this to be ground by double clicking on it, and then I'm going to add another game object, a 3D object, a capsule, and this is going to be our player. So let's click on capsule and rename this to player. So now we can mess around with this and see what's going on. So as you can see here, our player is actually down in the ground, but you can't really tell what's going on very well. So let's take a closer look. So the way we navigate through our scene view here to move around, if you click in the scroll wheel of your mouse, you can click and drag and it'll move the camera around like that. Or you can alternatively switch to this little hand view here, and you can just click and drag all the way around in case you don't have a scroll wheel on your mouse or you're using a trackpad on your laptop or anything like that. Let's go back to this view here. And now if you also hold Alt while clicking and dragging, you can spin the camera around. So this way you can get a good view of what's going on in the world and kind of see everything that you can possibly see. So we can also scroll up and down to zoom in and out like that. And we can see that our little capsule, or our player, is halfway into the ground. If we turn the camera down, well, our plane disappears because it's a one-way 3D object that we can only see from looking down at it. But looking up, you can see, okay, well, there's a whole bottom half of this player we couldn't see before. So let's move our player up in the air. So we move him up by clicking on the green axis of our movement here. So that'll be the y-axis. So we're moving it up. And as you move it up and down, you can see over here, our y value changes as we go up and down. And just to get this exactly where we want it to be, we're going to set the y value over here to be 1. So it's exactly touching the plane, just as we have it here. So now we have this guy that we're going to use as a player, and the ground below us that we can see and actually do some stuff with. The only problem is, well, they're both the same color. So if I spin this around here and zoom out a little bit, it kind of makes our player a little bit hard to see. So let's make some materials to make sure that we can make our ground a different color and our player a different color. So go over to our assets folder here on our project tab. We're going to right click in the folder and we're going to create a new folder that we're going to call materials, like that. Then we're going to go into that folder, and then here we're going to create a new material down here. So we're going to call this one player, and we're going to create another one, create material, and we're going to call this one ground. So now we've got a player material and a ground material. They both look the exact same at the moment, but we're going to make a little change to that now. So what we're going to do is, on our player one, we're going to go to the color kind of block area here. We're going to click on that, and we'll make this a nice kind of shade of blue. I think will look should stand out enough from our ground. And we're going to go to the ground and make this one a little bit more green, because ground, generally speaking, is green. At the most basic level, kind of like grass, I suppose. So we'll pop that there like that. And now to apply these to these objects, it's really straightforward and simple. All we have to do is just click and drag the ground onto our ground object and the player onto our player objects. So now we have two separate little things that are able to stand out, and we can mess around with the sliders and stuff. Now that we've applied it to our player, because we know that this material is on this player, any changes we make to this material will affect the player here. So if we were to decide to go and make it a nice shade of red, our player automatically gets updated and changed with all the colors that we wanted to have. We can fiddle around and make it more metallic, so it's a bit more shiny, give it a bit more smoothness, So it perfectly kind of reflects the world around it. We can spin the camera around. You can see how it affects as you move around. And you can mess around with all these different values, but for now we're just going to keep it nice and simple. Put the smoothness back to 0.5 and keep the metallicness out of our player, because we don't want a robot player just yet. We might at some point in the future, but for now we're okay with this as it is. So now that we have that, the next thing we want to be aware of is lighting in our game. So you can see when you create a 3D scene in Unity, it automatically creates a couple of things. So we created a ground and a player. It also created a camera and a directional light. So a directional light, although it's placed, you can see it's placed right here above our player, we can move this around within the world and it doesn't actually change where the light is coming from. Because the directional light is kind of like a universal light. We're imagining this is the sun. It's thousands of miles away, so whatever light it's throwing onto the player is coming no matter where you are, or where this light object is placed. But we can rotate this around, so let's switch to our rotate tool here. And if I rotate it on the y-axis, which is this green one here, you can see as we rotate it around, the shadow of the player moves around with the camera. With the light. And you can see over here it's changing on the y-axis. We can also change it on the other axes if we wanted to. You can see it kind of changes to sunset a little bit, because it's a specific light made this way as default within Unity. So I'm just going to set this back. I'm just going to undo Control and Z both of these things, because we want to keep it kind of simple and straightforward. But we could change the light to different types if we wanted to. So you can see under light here we've got type. So at the moment it's directional, so let's change it to a spotlight. See, what does that do? So you can see, oh, suddenly all the other light around us is all gone. But we've got this tiny little light now that you can see if we bring it a bit closer to the player, it's creating this one little spot of light within the world. We can ramp up the intensity to make it way brighter, like that. So now we've got a big bright light on our player. But again, that's not really the light we want to use. We're just having a look at these things. And we can also use a point light. So a point light kind of acts as, it's from the center point here, it emits light in a sphere out in every direction, not just in one particular spotlight direction. So that's how we can have it. So it's creating a little shadow around the player. And if we were to move the player around, so if I click on the player here and move him, you can see the shadow moves around with the player. But unlike the kind of sun model, our little light here is just coming out at a specific point really close to the player. So let's go back to the original light we had. So directional light, we'll go back to directional, and we'll just put this up here out of the way. We don't really need to worry too much about it now. We know our directional light is there. We don't really have to think about it anymore. So now that we have seen that in action, let's grab our player. If we were to run the game at the moment, of course, if we hit play, absolutely nothing happens. What we're going to do is give our player a little bit of physics to make things a bit more interesting. So let's go to our player here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a rigid body component to him. So we're going to go down to add component in the inspector over here. So the inspector shows all the various elements that are currently active on our player. So with our light, we had all these different light settings. So on our player, at the moment he has a capsule mesh, which is what is making him visible to us. He's got a capsule collider, which has given him physical properties within the world, although at the moment we can't really see them doing anything. And he's got the mesh render is basically what shows us the color that we can actually see. So the mesh filter over here draws the shape, and the mesh renderer kind of applies the material that we created to the object. So what we want to do is add a new component that we're going to we're going to add a rigid body. So if we start typing in rigid body, it'll get it popping up here. So then we can just click on that. And now if we press play here, if we were to, in our scene view, because we can't do anything in our game view here at the moment, but in our scene view, if we were to click on this and drag it up in the air, when we let it go, it'll automatically drop down to the ground, just because it's got some basic physics applied to it. We're not doing anything else too crazy. We can move it around a bit. If we were to rotate it slightly, you see the physics will keep it going and it'll keep rotating because it wants to fall over once it gets over its tipping point. So that's the basic kind of physics that we've got going on. We could actually, just as a quick little example, let's just throw in a 3D sphere here. I'm going to put this up above the player, kind of roughly above the player if I can line it up. And if we were to hit play, oh, we haven't, I'm going to put a rigid body on that ball as well. So that drops down and it knocks the player over. Simple physics interactions, but nice and straightforward and easy to do within Unity. So I'm going to delete him back out again. So we've got our player, we've got a little bit of ground. We're going to set up a couple of little objects in our little area here that we're going to use as we go further on to kind of test out what our player can do. So the first thing we're going to do is get our ground here. I'm going to make it much bigger because at the moment it's this tiny little area for our player to walk around in. That's no use to us. So to make it bigger, we're going to go to our scale tool here. So if we click on any of these individual objects, we can scale it in that direction like that, or we could scale it out like that. We can scale it on that axis as well, but because this is just a flat plane, that won't actually do anything for us. But what we're going to do is click on this center object, and that'll scale all the points out at the exact same size at the exact same time. So I'm just going to make a bit of a bigger area. I'm going to scale it all up to about 8 on our scale over here. So it's a little bigger than 8, but that's okay. Next thing we want to do is add in a couple of objects that our player is going to navigate around within the world. So we're going to go to Game Objects, 3D Object. I'm going to add a cube in here. I'm going to make this a bigger cube. I'm going to make it 2 by 2 by 2, like that. Now we can click and drag and move this around. You can see in our game view that it's kind of hovering a little bit above the ground, and that's because, so by default, when you create a cube, its size will be 1 by 1 by 1. We've doubled the scale of it, so now its size is 2 by 2 by 2, but we can see its Y position is 1.2, whatever like that. So that means the center of the object is 1.2 above the ground. So if we were to put it to be exactly 1 above the ground, that means it'll be touching the ground because it's 2 high. The center of it is obviously at 1 high, and then if we're setting the center to be 1 high, then it's exactly 1 above the ground, so our object will be touching the ground perfectly. But that's probably too high even for what we want it to be doing. We want our player to be able to get up onto these objects. That's a bit of a high jump for our little character to be doing. So let's duplicate it. And the way we can duplicate it is, there's 2 ways to do it. We can hit Control and D like that, and you'll see we've now created an extra little cube, and I'm going to lower this cube down like this. So we're kind of creating a little bit of a staircase. And the other way to do it is if we right click in the hierarchy here, which shows all our objects in the scene. If we right click that and hit duplicate here, we can click and drag this other one out, and we'll drop that down just there as well, and we'll just kind of roughly line it up. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're essentially setting up a nice little testing area for our player to use. So we'll want to test little jumps like that. One other main thing we're going to want to test is walking up slopes. So we're going to create another cube. I'm going to duplicate that again. This one I'm going to make bigger on the Z-axis and on the X-axis like this. So we're not going to make it much taller, but we're going to make it longer like that. I'm going to drag it up a little bit. So now we've got a big flat area here. I'm going to add a new cube like this. We're going to move this over here. I'm going to make this one really long on one particular axis like this. Then I'm going to just move the camera over here so I can see some stuff. And actually, I'm going to make it go like this. And then I'm going to rotate it like that, so it's got a bit of a slope on it. And then we're going to try and move it into position like so. We can rotate the camera around, and we're going to move it up. It's not quite long enough, is it? So I'm going to stretch it out more. And basically what we want is, we want it to kind of, the corner to be matching up here. So I'm just going to roughly line it up. It doesn't need to be perfect. Actually, if I hold V and click on a corner, what we can do is, what V will do is it'll make it snap to particular points. So we held V, which made us snap to the corner of that little slope we just made, and we can make it click into place at the corner of the cube we just made. So what happens then is it's perfectly lined up, just the way we want it to. And if we want to move it kind of along to the, say, the middle of this object, we can just move it along this axis here. and it's actually perfectly lined up for us then. So we don't have to worry about having to do it by eye. We can just line it up perfectly, and it makes a bit more sense that way. So yeah, we've got a couple of little play testing areas here for our player to wander around in. And we've got our simple little scene set up. It's pretty basic, but it's nice and straightforward, and it's what we want to have in place to start going on with the rest of this series. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at how can we start moving our player around and actually traversing some of these objects that we just made in our world. And as this series goes on, we're going to add obviously a lot more things. We're going to cover basics of platforming, which is obviously jumping on things. But of course, we'll need to be able to collect objects within the world. We'll have to be able to travel through multiple levels, having maybe a level select system. We'll need music, we'll need sound effects, we'll probably need to add a way to shoot projectiles and things like that at different objects. All of this stuff is stuff we're going to cover throughout the series, and most importantly, we're going to make a fun game together. So thanks for watching this first episode. I'll be back soon with more tutorial goodness in the very near future.